Matrix expand our minds and, of course, make us all think, because I like to do that. Because, I mean, hey, if I'm out there all thinking, then you got to be thinking too, right? And since we're mirrored images of one another, that's what this is all about. And it don't matter what time you're watching this, when you're watching it, you chose it. And this is perfect for you exactly now and everything. So, let's talk about today. But before we get into it, let's get ourselves in the right place. So, everyone take a deep breath with me. You ready? And hold. Let it go. Let those shoulders relax. Take another breath. And hold. Let go. Let that jaw unclench. Let's put our hands on our heart. Take another breath. And hold. Let go. When we just speak to the fallen mindset, the Diablos, the Matrix system, we say deactivate, turn off. And we speak to the divine spark, the original blueprint of our original designs. We speak to creator mode. And we say fully activate, fully turn on. I am that I am. Take a breath and hold. Let go. There comes a point where life no longer responds to old versions of you. Like what used to work and what no longer works, and what used to satisfy and what no longer satisfies. What used to feel like home now feels too small. And at first, that can feel like loss at times. And you may even think you are regressing even. You may even think you're stuck. You may even think something is wrong with your mind, your emotions, your faith, or your life. But what if discomfort is not the problem? What if discomfort is a signal that something false is no longer able to hold your life together? See, that is what we're talking about today. Not collapse, not punishment, not failure, rebuilding. Because there is a difference between being broken and being rebuilt. There's a difference between surviving and there is a difference between a life that managed and a life that is true. And this morning I want to speak about the architecture of transformation, the old structure. See, most people live inside an inner structure and they never consciously chose. They inherited beliefs. They inherited fears. They inherited emotional habits and they inherited roles, expectations, and survival patterns. And over time, those patterns became identity. So a person says, "This is just who I am." But often what they mean is, "This is what I learned to become in order to survive this world." And that changes everything now, doesn't it? Because it's not you. Because if your life was built on survival, then healing cannot be about feeling better now, can it? I mean, healing has to become about becoming more true. And truth can be disruptive. Truth does not always flatter. Truth does not always comfort. And truth does not always preserve what is familiar. See, truth rearranges. And that is why the old structure starts to feel unstable. You know, it's not because life has gone wrong, it is because The false arrangements is no longer sustainable. Your being just can't do it anymore. And the pain becomes subconscious because becoming conscious feels like pain because your awakening is not always peaceful at first. A lot of people imagine awakening as light clarity, bliss, and ease. But very often, the beginning of real awakening feels like disturbance. Because once you begin to see clearly, you no longer unsee what was hidden. You start noticing where you betrayed yourself, where you agreed to smallness, even, where you confused fear with wisdom, where you performed a life instead of living one. And that is awareness. That awareness can hurt. It can go deep. Not because awareness is harmful, but because it removes the anesthesia. And when you stop numbing, you start feeling. And when you stop avoiding, you start seeing. And when you stop performing, you start encountering the truth of your inner life. And this is why many people resist consciousness. They do not resist truth because they hate truth. They resist truth because truth requires change. And change requires a death of some kind, not a physical death, a death of old habits, old masks, old illusions. The self that rebuilds to protect you may not be the self that can carry you forward. Survival versus essence. This is one of the most important distinctions a person can make. There is the self that survives, and there is the self that is. And the survival self is reactive. It manages danger. It scans for threat. It adjusts, performs, pleases, withdraws, or defends, depending on what feels safest. See, the essence of self is different. It is steadier. It is quieter. It is less interested in control and more interested in truth. And when people are living mostly survival, they often feel fragmented. They feel overstimulated. They feel disconnected from their own center. And they may even feel like they are watching their own life from the outside. And that is because survival is not the same thing as presence. Presence is what happens when the nervous system no longer has to spend every moment defending identity. Presence allows you to meet life instead of bracing against it. And real rebuilding begins there. Not when you have all the answers, not when you have perfect conditions, but when you begin to live from a deeper center than fear. The body keeps the blueprint. See, a lot of people want change in their thoughts, but not in their nervous systems. They want a new mindset without a new posture. They want peace without releasing tension. They want clarity without grief, and they want expansion without letting go. But the body remembers. The body carries old alarms, old contractions, old expectations, old patterns of defense. So when a life is being rebuilt, the body often feels it become before the mind understands it. And that can slow up exhaustion, sensitivity, restlessness, heaviness, or even the feeling that you cannot keep living the same way anymore. It just can't do it. And that is not weakness. That is information. I mean, sometimes the body's saying, this place is not sustainable no more. This road is too light. This environment is too noisy. This identity is costing way too much. And all of a sudden you got sensory issues going on that you've never thought you had before because the body's saying, no more, man. And if you ignore those signals long enough, the body will force a reckoning. It will get your attention. Not to punish you, to protect you. Go, yo, I'm going to knock your butt out for a little bit because you are needing to rebuild. And so rebuilding is not just mental act, it is a whole system of adjustment. Your thoughts, emotions, body, and spirit all have to be brought into alignment because even the body has been believing lies. And let me tell you something. If you've ever been a people pleaser in your life, you were nothing but a liar. So come to comfort with that so that you can come into the truth. Why truth feels heavy at first is truth can feel heavy before it feels liberating. And that is because truth exposes what denial was helping you avoid. Denial can be a temporary shelter. It can help a person function when they are not ready to face something, but it is not a home. And eventually, denial becomes expensive. It costs energy, it costs clarity, it costs vitality, it costs authenticity. And when truth starts knocking, it often arrives with weight because truth says, you cannot keep pretending, you cannot keep editing yourself to fit. You cannot keep living divided. This is why some people call awakening a burden at first. They mistaken the weight of revelation for the problem itself. But the weight is often just the grief of seeing clearly. And the grief is not failure. Grief is the sound of the old order leaving and the death of the false agreement. And every human being lives by a set of inner agreement. And some of those agreements are consciousness. I want to live honestly. I want peace. I want freedom. But many are unconscious. I must stay small to stay safe. I must be useful to be loved. I must hide to feel real. I must keep the peace at any cost. Those are just lies to yourself, and I must never need too much, and I must never disappoint. And those agreements are usually formed early, and they shape the whole architecture of a life. But at some point, truth arrives and begins to challenge the agreement, and that can feel terrifying because the agreement used to hold the world together. And still, if the agreement was false, it was never truly supporting you. It was only containing you. So rebuilding means letting false agreements die. It means no longer organizing your life around lies, inherited fear, or emotional bondage. That is not easy, but it is freedom. The role of solitude is many people fear solitude because solitude removes the noise that kept them distracted. But solitude is often where rebuilding begins. No, not because being alone is automatically better, but because silence reveals what noise conceals. And when you are alone and long enough, you start hearing what you actually believe. You start really hearing. That's why I went into nature, man. I tell you, the tree isn't trying to be another tree, it's just standing there. The cactus isn't trying to become the oak tree, it's being its prickly self. And none of them are performing, they're being. So, what you actually believe, what you actually fear, what you actually want, and what you have been tolerating, what you have been calling normal, that is actually draining you, and you begin to see it there in nature. That kind of clarity is uncomfortable at first, trust me. But then there's nowhere to run to because you're in the middle of absolutely nowhere. It's sacred. And when the soul speaks, it rarely says keep going exactly the same way. It just says something must change. That is why solitude can feel both painful and healing at the same time. It strips performance and invites honesty. If you're always surrounding yourself around people and busyness, how are you going to ever face the pain? The humility of rebuilding. See, rebuilding requires humility because rebuilding means admitting that what you thought was solid was not fully aligned. And it means admitting that some of your strategies were survival strategy. And it means admitting that you may have confused intensity with truth or familiarity with love or achievement with worth. And that is humbling. But humility is not humiliation. Humility is the strength to stand in the reality without defending illusion. And that is so powerful. When a person becomes humble in this way, they stop needing every part of the old story to be preserved. And they stop needing to be right about what no longer serves them. And they stop needing the old identity to remain intact. And then the real change becomes possible because you cannot rebuild life while clinging to a lie about what it really already is. And what a real rebuild looks like is a real rebuild is not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like better boundaries, quieter habits, less performance, more truth, better rest. Fewer false commitments, more honest relationships, slower living, clearer priorities, and sometimes the biggest change is not a public change. It is an internal organization. The person who still looks the same from the outside, but inside they are no longer ruled by the same forces. And that is real rebuilding. See, a person begins to speak differently, choose differently, rest differently, love differently, decide differently, not because they become someone else, because they become more themselves. That is the goal, not reinventing for image, revelation for truth. Letting that blueprint of our original design come shining through this spark, the diamond. The fear of letting go. See, one of the hardest parts of rebuilding is release. You have to release what you relied on. You have to release false certainties, and you have to release identities that gave you temporary structure. And you have to release versions of yourself that no longer fit. And that can feel like standing over a grave, man. Because in a real sense, you are burying something, but what you bury is not your essence, it is the false shell. And this is why people often panic at the edge of growth. They sense something ending, and their survival system interprets it as danger. Yet some endings are necessary, and some endings are mercy, and some endings make room for the real thing. Do not confuse attachment with destiny. Just because something was once part of your story does not mean it belongs in your future. Become that clear vessel. See, the deeper purpose of rebuilding is not just to self improvement, it is to become a clear vessel. And that means less distortion, less noise, less inner division, and less pretending and less compression. A clear vessel can hold more truth, more peace, more responsibility, more love. But clarity does not come by adding more and more. Clarity comes by removing the cloud, the vision. And that is why spiritual growth often feels like subtraction, because you lose what was false. You release what was too heavy, and you let go of what was never really yours. And what remains is simpler, clearer, and stronger. And that simplicity is not emptiness, it is the strength without fragmentation. And eventually, if you stay with the process, you begin to feel a new center form. Not a center built on image, not a center built on control, not a center built on approval, a deeper center. And this center does not panic as quickly. It does not need to prove itself constantly. It does not need to be seen. It exists. It does not need to be force of outcome. It has roots. And when a person begins living from the center, their whole life changes. There are still humans and they still feel. They still feel and they still struggle, but they are no longer as easily disorientated by every wave. That is maturity, that is groundness, and that is what rebuilding creates. So if today your life feels uncertain or unstable or uncomfortable, do not rush to label it as failure. Maybe you are not being torn down. Maybe you are being rebuilt. Maybe what is leaving was never meant to stay, and maybe what is shaking was never meant to be permanent. Maybe what you are losing is the version of you that could not carry truth. And let that rebuilding happen. Let it be slow. Let it be honest. Let it be deep. I mean, do not demand that your next life look like your old life with new decorations. Ask for something truer, something steadier, something cleaner, something more aligned with who you really are. Because the goal is not to survive, because forever in this disguised version of our old selves and be Mr. Disguisey, the goal is to become real. And when you become real, you do not just live differently, you live from truth. And that's a beautiful place. It's a place of peace and being. Peace and love, you guys. We'll see you next time.